my name is Darren Vernon with the Canadian Association for Equality, Western Ontario. Today I want to introduce you to a guest speaker we have. We're starting a video series. This is the first of many to come regarding men's issues, and we want to hear men's stories. And today I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Darren. Hello, Dan.
Thank you, Darren. Probably say off the beginning that I learned of Cafe due to a news story that was in London about the movie The Red Pill. My wife worked at the TV station, and she actually had to push to get news coverage of it. Called me at home, told me about it, so I immediately made sure that I would be able to go to it. And now I've been asked to tell my story, and basically why I want to be part of Cafe, see Cafe do something. For me, it actually started at 10 years old with the sexual assault that I suffered as a child. But the biggest trauma that I suffered was in the early 1980s when I was sitting at home. And I saw an ad come on TV that said, if you've ever been a victim of sexual assault, call. There's people here who care, who want to talk to you. And since I had been suffering flashbacks and panic attacks after the birth of my two children, I guess I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to protect them from the same fate that I suffered. So because of these panic attacks, and I knew what they were about being a victim of a rape at 10 years old, I called the number. It was probably the worst thing I've ever done in my life. As I started to explain what had happened to me and what I was going through, and the lady stopped me and she said, "You're talking about yourself, and you're a man." And I said, "That's right, I'm a man, and I was raped and left on a riverbank in East London at 10 years old, and I'm a victim of a sexual assault, and I'd like to really talk to somebody about this." She said, "Look, we're here to help women, and we don't care. You're a man." And then hung up the phone. About 20 minutes later, I found myself in the basement, standing on a rickety chair with a noose around my neck and the rope entwined in a cross bridge in between the floor joists. And I reached up above my head and grabbed the rope to make sure that it was going to hold, and I pulled my weight up off the chair before I was going to kick the chair out and let myself go. At which point I got angry because I had two beautiful little girls upstairs sleeping. My wife was at college taking the evening course. And I thought, why should my kids grow up without their father because of what some ill-intentioned woman told me from an organization that purely didn't like men? And I got myself out of the situation and dealt with it on my own for the longest time. To go back to what happened to me at 10 years old and living in East London and having a dog, and walking my dog along the river where everybody played down there. I was down there one time and there was a stranger who literally, as I was walking along the path, reached out to grab me as I went by and forcibly, anally raped me. I made my way home afterwards with great pain. The police were called. They came to the house. Because of my description, my older sister actually had an idea of who this person was. The police got an address. I was bundled into a police car, taken to the person's house, walked into the living room. The people brought their 19-year-old son out for me to identify right in his own home. The next day, in the morning, I was taken down to the police station, into a detective's room that smelled like cigar smoke. In fact, the guy was smoking one. Leaned over into my face and said, "So, what did you do?" As if I was the person that had done something wrong. I buried that for most of my life. And that night, in the early 1980s, when I called the Rape Crisis Center of London, was the real turning point. That's where I would consider to be what I call the secondary abuse of male victims by a philosophy that just doesn't want to see males as victims and is quite willing to kicked them to the curb. 1993, there was a psychologist in Toronto who made a statement that said society gets what it deserves by ignoring the needs of the male victim of sexual assault. And he came to London and they had a sexual assault seminar about males, which I was working at the TV station, so I went down there. I ended up doing an interview with a reporter there. And that was the first time I ever went public with it. A few years later, in London, there was a radio show. Or, pardon me, within the year there was a radio show. And an NDP MPP was on the radio. She was talking about victim services, so I called and asked what they were going to do about male victims. And she very succinctly said, "We will not see a dime spent on male victims until all of women's pain has been ameliorated." Purely a value had been set, and male victims were definitely not going to get any help. A couple of years later, there was a sexual assault survey that was being done in London. For women, they handed out questionnaires to be filled in from 23 different agencies in the city. For males, they put an ad in the paper under the escorts for hire. Two philosophies were, or two thoughts, train of thoughts were in place, obviously, that either all men were whoremongers and cruising the escorts for hire, or men didn't do that and thereby they wouldn't get any male responses for this. I called up, it was the Battered Women's Center. I asked for a survey, they sent it to me, I talked it up with friends, I called back for another one for another friend, and the lady was a little cool to me. I called up for a third friend, at which time she got really hostile with me for calling. And I said, "Well, you wanted male input, I'm getting it. I'm talking it up with my friends who I know are also victims." About 10 minutes after that phone call, the police came to my door. It was quite clear to me that male input into a sexual assault survey in London was not wanted. The one and only time I know that the government put money towards male victims was $2.2 million from the Attorney General's office. The Sexual Assault Centre of London said they should get that money because they had vast experience dealing with victims. As far as I knew at the time, they'd never had a male victim. I wrote a scathing letter to the paper about it, and out of that I got an invitation to be a volunteer and take their training. In the intake interview, when I voiced up how feminism had treated me, they said, "Well, that was the women before us, this is us." My response was, "Well, you should be on the committee dealing with Indian land claims, and just tell them, well, that wasn't our forefathers, this is us now, so we'll just forget about it." Didn't wash with me. I did take their training. I did find it interesting that in their inclusivity night, that the one thing that was missing when they had race, color, everything, the LGBTQ, straight males were not included. What actually is happening is that sexual assault centers are working as like a goalkeeper. They're just bouncing men elsewhere. Nobody's advocating out there on behalf, and they're still mandated as male only, or female only rather. I don't get this. I don't see ambulances going out and just picking up one gender. I don't see research into diseases just looking at one gender. Mental health is affecting everybody. Sexual assault affects your mental health. It should be open to everybody.
Thank you very much for telling your story and sharing it with us today, Dan. Your story truly does matter, and we care deeply about what people go through and are affected by it. Once again, just wanted to remind our viewers that this is the first video in a series of videos that we're going to be doing to tell people's stories, because their stories truly do matter, and we want to share that with the public so people can become informed and educated about what we're doing here at Canadian Association for Equality. You can find us more information on these videos and our programs and services at Canadian Association for Equality